Hi, I'm Sojo Alex with Envision Strategies. Over the last few months, Envision team has been talking about the 5 keys to success in dining. The first one being any challenges in mission alignment. The others include overcoming resource roadblocks in dining, data gathering and measurement, communication, collaboration in food service, and overcoming different types of complexities. So we talked a lot about the main challenges, and we've seen throughout our industry career and also some of the solutions to overcome these challenges. So for now, we want to hear from our clients and friends in the industry of the same keys as they pursue to provide amazing food services and more to serve the campus community. So, and we also are going to hear some of the challenges they face and how they're overcoming these challenges. Today we have Charles Cruey, who's from Georgia College and State University. He is the Director of Auxiliary Services. Charles, could you tell us a little bit about your campus and then what does your responsibility include?
Thank you. My name is Charles Cruey, Director of Auxiliary Services at Georgia College State University. Our university was founded in the 1880s. It started off as a female university and now is been designated as the Georgia's Public Liberal Arts University. And we have about 6,000 undergrad students, and I manage all of auxiliary services, which includes dining, bookstore, vending, Bobcat card office, the parking transportation, housing.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about your dining program as well? What changes you've seen and how many locations there are, things like that.
Sure, our dining has we're in a small community. We're located right downtown. We have about 50,000 people in our city, and our university comprises, between 8 to 10,000 people between all the staff and people that are here. Our dining services has one main residential hall. We also have currently 3 retail units, but we just awarded our dining RFP, and we look to grow at least 1, if not 2, additional retail dining offerings. We're also just got through a process that we worked with Envision Strategies to get our contract awarded, and so we have another 5-year contract with Sodexo that shows a lot of promise for new innovation in the dining program.
So I think the first topic we wanted to talk about today are the challenges with mission alignment. So what is your university's mission and what is dining services mission?
So as I mentioned, Georgia College is the state's only designated public liberal arts university. And with that, the thought process is that we try to educate our students in the world of the ways of the world, very wide base, and they can specifically learn as they get further along. But we're trying to make them well-rounded to learn how to think and all that. Our purpose for dining services and all of auxiliary services is to enhance the quality of college life. We're here to support the students in their academic pursuits. We make things easy for them so they can focus on what they're here for, which is to get a world-renowned education so they can develop their careers.
Now, I was going to say, how do you align both the missions for the university and dining, or have you faced any challenges in aligning those missions at all?
Yeah, the reality is that it is difficult to align those because the nature of the fact that we are a client and a vendor, and there's the people on campus, they basically have 2 masters, right? 2 bosses. They have the Sodexo has their leadership they need to follow, and the management has to work with my team and the leadership we have here. And sometimes it's not eye to eye. They have clarity is missing sometimes, and understanding of what is the truth, what are we trying to make and build, and what are we willing to do to make that happen. That's the challenges I find often, is getting that clarity in place so that everyone involved knows.
And how do you think you're overcoming these type of challenges, especially in aligning both the missions together?
Oh, absolutely. So I've been in my role, this will be the first 18 months that I've been in this role. And we just, like I said, finished up the contract. And we've had Sodexo on our campus since 1986. And they've been, so we are one of the longest, no, we are the longest account they have in Georgia. So there was a lot of things that were, just became comfortable and was acceptable. But we've had a complete leadership change inside of Georgia College and inside of Sodexo. So my challenge and the objective I've taken moving forward is to change the program before that was there and focus on what can we improve. And that is, again, clearly defining what we're trying to achieve and what is acceptable and who are our customers and what do they want and how, what's going to be the acceptable way to get to these objectives.
So one of the things I've always wondered, you being in the position that you are with auxiliary services, that does not include just the dining contract, but multiple other contracts. How do you manage to keep all the missions aligned together with that one vision that or the mission that the university has? From your position of how you do that.
Yeah, so with all of those, again, you have to have a great team. But with that team, how are they great? You're clearly identifying what we want to try to achieve in any given amount of time. You can't do everything. So what will you focus on and what will you allow to go away, I guess, or not be as important? And that again boils down to clearly establishing what are we going to do? What do we need to really truly track? Because I do hate the tendency of bureaucracy within higher education. But there are some things we have to be clear about, right? We know that we want to have a certain satisfaction level on all of our surveys. We want to make sure that we are spending correctly, that we're following our budgets, that we are working and solving solutions or providing solutions in a timely manner. So how long is it taking to get us? So we clearly define that. And then just review how we're doing. Let's talk about and what challenges are we facing? And then why didn't it get done? And who do we need to talk to make sure that that is what we need to try to achieve?
So one of the most important keys to success in dining is communicating consistently. And of course, not only with the key stakeholders within campus, but also sometimes outside. And not only communicating, but also collaborating with each one of them. So how do you connect with the campus community?
It's a very important to note that while there was a lot of change in our leadership for Sodexo and Georgia College, what I feel was missing and what I'm working to establish is that succession planning, right? There's things that were verbally translated to me as my director was leaving and as my AVP was leaving, but there was nothing really documented. So going back to how do I establish these relationships, taking what was verbal and reaching out to, for example, athletics. There's a lot that goes on with athletics, but supporting the athletes and making sure they get fed, and we develop that program. So we reach out to the director of athletics and establish those relationships and try to find programming that works, because we're trying to find a win-win. What will be good for them and be good for us and doesn't detract from taking care of the overall student population and providing services, because we're finding a lot of challenges, I'm sure, as you know, with the labor force and the whole supply chain and just adapting to how things were and expectations from customers, how to deliver everything in a manner they want and quick enough and to the level of quality they want. So these are all the sorts of challenges, but taking the time to identify who we want to have relationships with and how we can help them. That's just reaching out and talking to folks.
And how frequently do you keep in touch with these different stakeholders on campus?
Quite often. I mean, in higher education, there tends to be a lot of meetings, so I try my best. Committees that are outside my normal circle of people I interact with on a day-to-day basis, so that's how I tend to grow that. On the security governance committee, for example, so I'm exposed to the public safety a little bit more, and then IT and all those. So finding out their viewpoints of how they perceive our dining services / auxiliary services, because a lot of people don't understand what auxiliary services is to begin with.
That's true. That's true.
What we're doing and how we can help, and then how does every department on campus fit together to make this Georgia College for the students. So I try to meet with people at least once a month. I mean, different avenues.
And how about communicating or even collaborating with let's say the dining staff or even your own staff, your auxiliary staff? Like how do you do that? Because there has to be some level of transparency, when it comes to everybody. So yeah,
We found it's very challenging right now for us. So in the last 2 years that I've been working, I've been working in food services on Georgia College since about 2018. They asked me to come over and help out. We were having problems with we took our Chick-fil-A from a express service to a full service. I have numerous years, 20 plus years of retail or food service. I used to own my own restaurant. So I brought that over. They asked me to help out with the Chick-fil-A because they just weren't delivering the way they were. In fact, we were about to lose our contract with Chick-fil-A because they were underperforming so bad. So being a part of that, I worked in that unit with them as a Georgia College employee. I was able to work with the people that are right there serving, the cashiers, the people in the kitchen, the cooks, then the manager, because they lost a lot of management over the last few years. But I talk to the staff daily. I go by, I learn their names, I learn who they are. We've just, like I said, we went through we're on our third GM within the last 18 months. So he doesn't actually start till August 29th. So I have to work with the temporary GMs and the actual management that's on staff right now on campus. So that's why I focus on talking to them and understanding what challenges they face and letting them know we appreciate what they've done. This has been a very trying year for everyone.
absolutely. Oh yes. How about with students? How do you communicate or your team communicate with students? How do you continue to collaborate with them as well?
So our focus on students is, again, we'll always preface everything with the fact that the pandemic has sort of changed things. This is the first year we're really getting back into play. And so the strategies I will work with is to develop the Student Culinary Council again, get that going. We'll work with the SGA to develop that and listen to what they have. We're also engaging with as many groups as we can because we're trying to make sure we foster the ability to cater some of their events. Students generally don't have as much money as the rest of the university, so our RFP included a different catering that allows a more affordable option for them to select from, and we're just trying to make sure we provide that. We work directly with Student Affairs. They've asked to be included in a lot more of the planning and programming that we do, so that's another avenue we'll be working with on that.
I think the last question I had about communication and collaboration is, how do you ensure transparency between you and your supplier? Because transparency goes both ways. So how do you ensure that there is enough transparency? Do you have KPIs? How do you make sure that you're communicating the same thing and have the same goal?
So that has been the challenge. Because this has been the same account for 40 plus years, the accepted nature was that Sodexo was doing a good enough job, and nobody really tried to get any better. It was good enough. It didn't have to be any better, I guess, is what the thought process was. And as we went into this new RFP and with a new AVP or new Vice President of Finance and Administration, the charge was to provide the best that we could. We wanted our students are different than normal students. They come from the most affluent areas of Georgia, around Atlanta, and they have high expectations. So our program cannot be like some of the other programs in Georgia. So to talk about transparency, it starts with me being as honest as I can with the vendor, pointing out things that I see need to be improved. Taking that experience from owning my own restaurant and recognizing what it takes to make people happy, and how can we, what things can we prevent to make, what can we stop that will make them not be happy, right? There's things that you can do that will always make them upset. And so if you prevent those things, then you're setting yourself up for the win. So I work with that. And the transparency is that, I guess the one of the biggest obstacles to transparency is that fear that they will be blamed, because people tend to focus on what and who instead of why. Like, you failed to do this and you were in charge of it, so you're blamed for that. Other than we weren't given enough notice, or nobody clearly identified the objective, nobody clearly identified a VIP that we needed to take care of. And those are the things that I hope the transparency brings, if you can get past that. But a tendency in this higher education is for people to focus on what and who instead of the why. So I try to make sure that the vendor knows we're trying to make this better. The focus is on how can this improve.
Great. I love that. That's a great answer, Charles. So more than often, we see that the success of any dining program is solely based on financials. But we believe that to measure a successful program, we should understand all the service side of it, we should understand the operations, and also the food part of it. So what data do you usually utilize in making decisions from your level?
Again, being somewhat new to this process and spending a majority of the last 18 months just developing this RFP to identify what program requirements we wanted and how was it going to be different from what we currently have. We weren't measuring much, and that was the problem. So this new RFP and the way we're walking into this is changing so that we can hold myself and auxiliary services along with a vendor accountable for deliverables, like you say, the KPIs and all that. I'm going to defer for just a second to talk about when I used to have my own restaurant. I did my own restaurant. I was doing okay. It was great. But then it was starting to be, I wasn't making as much money. I was working too much, too frustrated. I got to a point where I was like, I need to sell this place. And I talked to my partner. He says, yeah, sure. Well, do you have enough money to pay off the loan? So it's like, no, I don't. So it's like, so we have to button this up and make this a little bit better so we can pay off the loan, and then you can quit, because otherwise it's coming out of your pocket, and I obviously didn't have it. So at that point, I buckled down and started to pay attention to my prime costs, my labor, my food costs, because those are the only two things I really could control. And once I started doing that, within 3 months, we started to make a profit. And within 6 months, my life was so much easier. So when I think about dining services and all that, it is keeping up with the numbers so that you can get better, so that everyone involved kind of understands what we're trying to achieve. People are so scared to share numbers and all that, but there's percentages too. Percentages do the same thing. Knowing and understanding that you went from 30% food costs to 29% food costs. It's showing that you're improving. And that little bit there helps people feel like they have control of their job, and that they do something meaningful. And that's what I really think is important about the data. So again, tracking the core of our food and labor, tracking our customer satisfaction surveys, tracking execution. Is it fast enough? Is it high enough quality? Those are the sorts of data points that we look at, or I want to look at more. Again, meal swipes, times of day, compared to, you have so much meal swipes on Monday, Wednesday, but you have less labor on those days. Why are we doing it that way? Those sorts of things that we're trying to get open with our vendor.
And I guess because it's still starting, so do you have a set of KPIs that you've come up with for this next coming year?
Yes,
or?
we would just, and it was quite like pulling teeth with the vendor to finally get them to agree. But we have things that are based on the financials, making sure that year-over-year growth or volunteer meal plan sales, sales at each unit, retail unit. Again, how much food waste and how much the plate costs are. Those are part of our KPIs. But we're also tracking labor and, you know, how much labor is compared to available compared to the budgeted amount, because that has been a significant
Right.
challenge over the last year. You know, we operated probably at 50% labor force just because nobody could get hired.
Do you have any examples from your, I guess you kind of explained a little bit about, I was going to ask about any examples if you've turned metrics into like your annual plans. You can explain from your restaurant perspective of how you tracked, prime cost and labor cost and changed that into a profit. Are there other examples, or have you seen in the last 18 months, have you seen certain things that were happening that you could change into, your next annual plan or any of that, or?
So, I mean, an example of how we use some of the data and how I'll translate it, how I imagine this is going to impact later. So, like I said, I worked at that Chick-fil-A, and we went from the express to the full service. And in that, we went basically the summer of 2018, they closed. And it had been Chick-fil-A Express for 30 some odd years. So a tiny little place. And we went from there to a full service within the 3 months with the same staff. They may have increased a few people. We had no retail manager from Sodexo, but we also increased sales by over 300% because they included meal equivalency. And so the meal equivalency allows the students to come to Chick-fil-A, so it just went crazy. And we don't have the resources that Chick-fil-A has in the sense that it predicts how much food they use. It can take the sales trends and all that sort of stuff. So I took the time to download the point of sales and put it into Tableau, Power BI to track what product mix was, what times of the day they were coming, the days of the week. So I was able to identify our peak slots that people were coming, the students were coming, and how much product they were buying. So we create our own production sheet for that. And so looking at that, and I know Chef has that, but I would love for him to share it with me and then we share it with his team so they understand why we're doing what we're doing. And then looking at it and assessing, were we right? Were we wrong? Because our job is to make predictions, and then if we were wrong or if we were right, we adjust ourselves and the plan.
Right.
The whole pandemic really makes it important that we focus on protecting our labor resources and our food resources, because it's limited on both.
And you kind of touched a little bit on the tech side. So you said Power BI, you use Tableau. Are there other tech programs that you use to make sure that you get all the data together, or even to gather the data?
So that's the point moving forward, is to find a better and easier way to track all of that. I just it's so crazy to me to think that I have to physically dig through all of our historical data to find what we got last year. It's just not set up in a table or anything like that. So my objective as we go into this new contract is that every month we track our sales, and then I store these data per retail unit and for the meal plan, so that we can kind of get into that year over year. And we do that week over week, and month over month, just to see where we're at, tracking the sales and accounting for the price increases, just like you would do in a real retail unit if you were operating it yourself.
What words of advice, or what 3 words of advice do you have for your colleagues as they pursue these, keys to make their dining program successful?
I look at it as a business. I think coming from owning my own business and bringing that ownership in there and recognizing that it truly is the customer and their satisfaction that I have to have. When I owned my own business, I always looked at sales as an indicator. So every dollar that the customer gave us was a vote that we were doing something right. So when my sales were increasing, I knew we were doing things better. When my sales were decreasing, I had to try to identify what we were doing wrong. And again, a week off here, a week off there, or a week up, that's not really a trend, but 2 or 3 months in a row, and then listening to complaints, watching what food went back to the kitchen and into the garbage, were they not happy with it? So what are we doing differently? How do we change that? How do we keep it fresh? When we get into the higher education, I don't think enough emphasis is given on the fact that students do have a choice, and they're willing to go somewhere else. And not that they'll leave a college because of the dining program, but it can help them stay if it's good. And
Right. All right.
more. I think that's an important aspect that's not recognized by enough people.
I always say, once you graduate after many years, even people like me, when we talk about our college life, we typically ask what hall did you live in, and and then that kind of translates to where you went and ate too. Besides, nobody remembers most of their professors' names or any of that stuff, right? You're typically remembering your life experience on campus, and that includes housing and dining. So yeah, you're totally right. So, any other advice for your friends and colleagues in the industry, or?
So my mom and dad owned a restaurant when I was a kid. I went away they sent me away for vacation in the summer, and I came back when I was 14, and they bought a restaurant. And so when I did that for years, and once I got out of that restaurant, and when I went to college, I was like, I'll never work in a restaurant again. Then I got to college and I started working in a restaurant, and I loved it because, there essentially we had a diner before, but the restaurant was where everybody went to celebrate, and they had parties and you brought your friends, and when things happened in life, it really was a gathering. So when I decided to stay in the restaurant business and bought my own place and all that, I would hire people and interview them, and the thing I told them is my job every day is to throw a party. And people come to my place and they have fun and they pay me to clean it up. So my job was basically to make people smile and have a good time. And that's what I really try to translate to this whole dining experience. It is the experience. We're not selling food because the food isn't what makes it. It's how our staff interacts with them. When people love to talk to me as the owner, and I think people love talking to the GM, especially and leadership there, because that is an opportunity to tell people what you really think, that we're doing right, doing wrong. So I think just making sure people recognize that we're about the experience, and all the stuff that we track, all the financials and the check mark or the check boxes and all the procedures and policies are to make sure that people are happy. There's things because they're not happy if they're not safe. They're not happy if the food tastes bad. They're not happy if we don't have enough staff. So the focus on the experience.
Thank you, Charles, for being here today and talking to us both from a personal and a professional experience of how successful your dining program is. If our clients and friends would love to follow you on what your dining program is doing and all the successes, where can they do?
Sure enough. The best way will be our website at this point, gcsu.edu/auxiliary services. And that's where all our dining improvements will start showing up, and we are developing more of our social media as we go forward to relay all the new programs we'll be putting in.